The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
On behalf of RBCS and software test professionals, welcome to our webinar on 7 deadly testing sins. I am Rex Black, president of RBCS, a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm serving clients ranging from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. Since 1994, we've delivered insight and competence to hundreds of clients around the world. Our team of international consultants deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services to companies that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. I'm the author of 12 books on software testing, including the bestseller Managing the Testing Process and 4 books on the ISTQB program. We are presenting this webinar in partnership with Software Test Professionals. Check out their website at www.softwaretestpro.com. Attending today's webinar may earn you credit for QAI and or ASQ recertification. Check with QAI or ASQ to determine how to qualify. Typically involves saving the attendee email that you'll receive after this webinar. Attendance at today's webinar definitely earns you PMI PDUs. Thank you to Vicki Sasser for reviewing the material for PDU status and making valuable suggestions. Attendees will receive an email telling them how to claim the PDUs, including the PDU code. PDUs are available for live webinar attendance only. Before we start the presentation, some housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, submit them at any time via your webinar interface, but please note that I only answer them at the end. There is no need to ask for presentation copies. The presentation is already posted on the web. Go to rbcs-us.com, navigate to the Resource tab in the upper center, navigate from there to the basic library. By attending this webinar, you were automatically registered for the free e-learning drawing. Check your email over the next couple days and watch your spam filter. If you're having problems with the audio or visual components of this webinar, contact GoToWebinar support. Typically, the problems are either browser compatibility issues, company firewalls, or audio settings on your PC. So those would be the places to start. I hope you enjoy this free webinar from RBCS. We do these free webinars as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not just for profit company. Today we will be talking about 7 deadly sins of testing. One of the things that I've noticed as a consultant and a trainer and practitioner is that you might think that when a test team fails, the reason that it fails is because of competency issues. But actually, more often than not, competent test teams sabotage themselves in a lot of ways. Sometimes they're sabotaged externally, but we're looking at the self-sabotage in this presentation by certain attitudes and behaviors that are unhelpful. So I've classified these as the 7 deadly sins of testing. And what we'll do is look at each one of them here today. And give you some ideas on how to stop committing those sins if you are already doing it, and how to clean up the mess that could be created by the sins having been committed in the past. So these are in no particular order because really the impact of these things depends on the degree and extent to which they are occurring. The first one on my list here is the sin of irrelevance or redundancy, which is basically testing things that people don't care about or testing things that somebody else has already tested. So what you should do is to make sure you're testing what matters, have smart test selection strategies in place. Now, personally, I favor risk-based testing as primary test selection strategy, where you participate in a collaborative risk identification and assessment process with the various technical and business stakeholders, identify risks and rate their level of risk, and then from there put tests in place to mitigate those risks by testing the potentially problematic areas. That way you're sure that every test you're running is relevant to at least one stakeholder, because otherwise it wouldn't have ended up on your list of things to test. And also you need to look at what other people are testing. So, if the developers are running automated unit tests and they're achieving 100% statement and decision coverage, then it's probably not a wise use of your time to worry too much about code coverage as part of your system testing. In some cases, you might even want to avoid redundancy with UAT, though there can be some value in testing the things that are going to get tested in UAT so that there's a sort of a no surprises policy. Now, let's suppose that you're in an organization that has been making these mistakes of irrelevance and redundancy. What do you need to do to kind of clean up the mess? Well, you'll want to work closely with the stakeholders and show them that you're getting out of this mode, the irrelevant mode, the redundant mode, and you're going to work more collaboratively going forward. This is the kind of thing that people see that you've turned over a new leaf here. They'll usually give you the benefit of the doubt. Now, I'm going to illustrate each one of these deadly sins with a case study, and I'm going to start by telling a story on myself to begin with, which is years ago I was a test manager, and we were testing a operating system database query tool, and we had this pretty slick automated system that allowed us to submit a bunch of queries against a standard database and then check to see whether we were getting the same responses back regardless of the operating system and database. So it was fun and slick, as I say, and we propagated the test database across multiple different operating system database combinations. But what we weren't doing was testing some other really important quality characteristics like the ability to install the software and its usability. So we had these automated accuracy tests that did a very good job of finding problems with accuracy and compatibility, but once we had shaken out most of the accuracy and compatibility bugs, which happened fairly quickly, and get the diminishing returns or the pesticide paradox, if you're familiar with that principle, then really what we were doing was managing regression risk primarily and not managing some of these other quality risks. So the help desk people were pretty angry because they felt like we were ignoring things that were important, and they were getting a lot of angry phone calls from customers. And meanwhile, we're saying, well, yeah, but we're running thousands of tests. Well, sure, but the stuff that we were testing wasn't connected to what was really relevant for the tech support people. This did a lot of reputational damage to the team. So it was something that even once we put the manual tests in place to try to address these missing areas, it still wasn't quite enough to make people happy. So the next deadly sin here is ignorance. And this could be, there's sort of two dimensions of ignorance here. One has to do with insufficient technical testing or application domain skills. Not having the core skills necessary to be an effective and efficient tester in your particular area. The other dimension of ignorance here that I'm talking about is ignorance of your own organizational or user context, where what the priorities of the organization and the way in which the system is going to be used by the users is something that you're really not aware of. So what should you do to try to make sure that you're not committing this deadly sin? Well, one of the things that you should do is use task analysis, identify your critical skills, assess your team against those critical skills, and then put together a test team skills development plan that will get you into the right place. Now, I'm not going to try to explain this process in any depth here. Something that is explained in a couple of my books, Managing the Testing Process, and also in Advanced Software Testing Volume 2, this idea of doing a skills assessment. And there are other sources where you can find how to do task analysis and then a skills assessment. It's a fairly well-established human resource management technique. So that'll address your skills dimension. Now, how about the lack of awareness? Well, here this has to do with making sure that you have identified all of your different business and technical stakeholders and understand what their priorities are. And I'll recommend one of our earlier webinars that we did, Satisfying Testing Stakeholders. You can find a recorded version of that webinar on the RBCS digital library, as well as on the RBCS channel on YouTube. So, know who your stakeholders are, know what their priorities are. If you've been making this mistake, if ignorance has been a problem in either dimension, then definitely you'll need to engage as a test manager anyway in some pretty strenuous marketing efforts to try to make sure that people understand that you're fixing the problem, because otherwise the test team will be seen, and perhaps rightly so, while there's a gap in the knowledge, as really not contributing anywhere near what they should to the organization. And that has a lot of ripple effects in terms of the whole second-class citizen problem that test teams face and so forth. So, case study. This is based on my work primarily going around and doing training with people as well as doing consulting. I would say, and I haven't done statistical studies on this, but I would say that about half or more than half of the people who are working as testers, currently being paid to do testing, would know how to explain the concept of equivalence partitioning, and then, given a situation in which it could be used, actually develop a set of test cases using equivalence partitions. They're completely ignorant of the technique. And when you start talking about the more sophisticated techniques like the state-based test design or domain analysis or something like that, then even fewer people know how to do that. Now, I think part of the problem here is that there's real kind of, what I'm referring to here is proponents of ignorance that are, I think, getting us into trouble in our profession. So one very widely held belief that, well, anyone can test, how hard can it be? Just make sure that, it works before we put it into production. That attitude is quite widespread. Another thing that I think is problematic is we're different, or we're agile now, so those techniques don't apply to us, and we don't need any sort of formal test design techniques or formal testing concepts. We just do a bunch of exploratory testing because we're agile. I also think, quite honestly, that we have created a real problem for ourselves as test professionals, and I'm going to have a debate with Kem Kaner on this in July, who's going to take the other side of this. But I believe that this whole concept that was advanced back in the early 2000s about the schools of testing, and these completely incompatible schools of testing, has proven a real schismatic barrier to discourse and exchange of ideas and techniques. Part of that has to do with the lack of civility with which some advocates of one particular school, which, by the way, only the people who believe in schools of testing all adhere to the same self-proclaimed school. So some of the problem has to do with a lack of civility in the discourse, but I think the other thing is that it just creates this idea that we can only be doing one thing or another, and that there are certain techniques that only apply in certain schools. I think it's just been very damaging. Now, to the plus side, I think the ISTQB program has done a great job over the last 10 plus years of helping to resolve a lot of ignorance issues. There are well over 300,000 certificates issued at this point, and that's 300,000 people that will at least have a basic understanding of test design techniques and fundamental testing concepts. And as people move on to the advanced level, then that's going to do even more. So I think that's a real plus. Oops, pardon me. There we go. Now, the next deadly sin that's worth commenting on here is obstructionism. Testers and test managers that ultimately are more of an obstacle than an aid, and they don't see their role as serving the needs of the project and their stakeholders, but rather as enforcing. Typically. So, you see the symptoms of this are situations where there's a test plan, you've got defined entry and exit criteria for a particular level of testing, and even though the reasons behind the creation of those criteria have changed, there's an insistence that if we don't adhere to those entry criteria, then the world's going to end. Exaggerating the obstacles that exist, kind of coming up with excuses why more testing can't be done, saying, well, needs changed, organizational priorities change, but we don't change. We follow testing best practices, and therefore we don't want to have anything to do with Agile, or we don't want to have anything to do with test automation. Now, why would a test manager, why would a tester, why would a test team do this? Well, there's a few reasons. The two most common ones. One is the test team that has sort of defined their role to be a process cop, to be an enforcer of software engineering best practices. There are circumstances where that's appropriate, but it's typically not the test team that's the appropriate party to carry it out. And even if it is, then it's definitely something that you want to get clarified to make sure that both up and across the management chain, everybody understands that that's what you're there to do. Because if you are there to be a process cop, then so be it. But if everybody doesn't understand that, they're going to see you as an obstructionist. Now, another reason that the obstructionism happens is the contrary personality problem. Sometimes you get a tester who's just contrary. They like to see, they like to confront developers. They're a contrary type of people. I remember hearing from one client that he had come across a testing group whose slogan was, "We're not happy until you're not happy." Meaning that their whole job satisfaction was creating unhappiness amongst their stakeholders. So I think that's a clever line, but when you say that in any degree of seriousness you start to behave put that into action, of course you're creating an obstructionist organization. If you have people that are contrary in your organization as a manager, your best bet is probably to get rid of them, to be blunt. Because they're going to be constantly creating brush fires of unhappiness with your test team that you are going to have to deal with. And if there's a long history of your test team being obstructionist, this is the kind of thing that will take literally years to work out. I've seen this with clients where you have the past test manager, some cases the test manager from 4 or 5 years ago, who was this sort of obstructionist type of individual, and even though there's a new test manager in place, people are still skeptical, still burned by the past experience. So let me give you a case study of this. A tester. He is a very competent person as a tester, really a very good tester, and is also very good as a lead tester. So because of his competence, a lot of technical groups are meritocracies, and his fellow testers see him as extremely competent, look up to him, will follow his lead, and his instincts are good in terms of how to lead the testers. But he has a very negative way of presenting his perspectives, that while it's fine within the test team, doesn't translate well outside. I remember one of my colleagues, Ren McNary, a test manager that I worked with years ago, said, "Optimistic on the outside, pessimistic on the inside." And what he meant by that was, you want to have that attitude of professional pessimism within the testing organization, but when you're relating to your peers, your stakeholders, you don't want to come across as very negative, and that's the problem this guy had, is he didn't know how to modulate his message to communicate real effectively outside of the test team. So quality, was never good enough, and didn't have a lot of respect for management. Thought some of the developers were stupid, and so he kind of painted himself into a box. He couldn't really get outside of this lead tester role because he just couldn't operate very effectively with as a test manager interfacing with non-testers. And also, in interview processes, it works as a contractor, and this can create problems when you're going for an interview if the people you're talking to, who are usually not just testers, say, I don't know if I'm going to want to work with this guy. All right, and the next one here is the adversarialism. It's somewhat related to the obstructionism in the sense that the root cause of it can be the same. This is where a test team, test manager, or individual tester has made a decision unilaterally that their process cops should enforce software engineering best practices, or quality cops, meaning that they have to, quality has to be a certain level, and they're the only ones who care about quality, and they're the ones who measure it. And this can happen, again, based on a unilateral decision. But it sometimes happens when the test organization is told to do it, but not given the political support for that, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, what you need to do here with adversarialism to solve the problem is to work carefully with your managers and stakeholders to clarify what your role is, what your mission is, what your objectives are. Again, I would refer you to the recorded webinar on satisfying testing stakeholders as a way of getting a handle on how to go about doing that. This is definitely a very serious problem when it happens, and can lead to some really bad feelings, some real resentments directed towards test teams. I know of two test teams that were really outright failures based on this adversarialist situation. One of them, it's the subject of our case study here, the test team in this particular example had implemented and enforced a very rigid software engineering process on all of the other teams in their organization. The process was encoded, if you will, through a lifecycle tool that had been selected, and it really had been selected in a very unfortunate way. And a small group of people went off and picked the tool on their own, and then came back and pretty much crammed it down everybody's throat. People were told, well, you have no choice, you're going to have to use this. There was no attempt to sell it, and there's no collegiality, if you will, in the selection process. And then so you've got this tool that was picked by a set of people who were seen as high-handed and not open to input, and then the life cycle that's encoded in that tool is being enforced by this test team in a very, very rigid way. And this had all happened at the direction of a CIO who was the CIO before I came in and did the assessment. Well, what happened was he told these people to do this, but he never told other people that he was telling them to do it, really. So they were being taken by surprise. Now, he would give them some amount of political backing when stuff bubbled up, but I mean, the thing was that he had never really done the proper leadership of stepping up and saying, this is what I want these people to do, and this is why. And then when the CIO left and a new one came in, he did not support this idea, did not think it was a good idea, and it persisted for a year or so underneath him. So, in that whole period of time, the whole relationship between testers and developers had been just completely poisoned. If you ask the developers, well, what's the value of testing? They say testing has no value. It obstructs us, and these people are constantly our adversaries. Are trying to hold us up, and we just need to get around them. Whereas if you ask the testers or the test managers about what's the developer's role in producing a quality product, they would say things like, oh, those developers are complete idiots. If we weren't in the way, holding their hand and making sure that they were doing the right things, they'd be throwing all sorts of crap into production. So a total absence of respect or trust on either side. And that's pretty much deadlocked in terms of any sort of process improvements. What ultimately happened was that the test team was disbanded, and testing work was sent overseas because there was no way to resolve the situation. Okay. So now we get to the next deadly sin here of nitpicking. So what happens here is that you can get one or more testers, or perhaps even entire test teams, that are making a bigger deal out of defects than they really deserve, or reporting a lot of very trivial defects while at the same time missing more important defects. Now, this can happen for various reasons. One is sort of just a lack of perspective, a lack of understanding of what's important. There can be breakdowns in the bug triage process, sort of a poker game element of the bug triage process that should be resolved. You can have problems with the definition of the priority and severity ratings. So different people think of the priorities and severities differently, and what's seen as proper classification by one group is seen as inflating or fear-mongering by the others. Sometimes people just are naturally, what I'm referring to here is repeat inflators. I mean, people who just will not, they'll find some way of classifying even the most unimportant bug as critical. And sometimes that has to do with ego identification. If you hear testers talk about my bugs get fixed, or I need to advocate my bug, or anything, something like that, you've got ego identification going on. And the problem with that is it sets up a situation where the tester feels motivated to nitpick and motivated to make a big deal because they are defining their own value to the team based on what percentage of their bugs get fixed versus deferred, excuse me. So, you want to look at what the causes are behind this and put the solutions in place. This problem, once it's fixed, the immediate impact of it does tend to go away, but certainly there can be long-term damage to the credibility of the test team, especially if the message has filtered up to senior management about, those testers, they're always making a big deal out of nothing, and it's not, none of this stuff is anywhere near as important as they tend to say it is. Now, a case study in nitpicking. This is based on just working with clients around the world. I have had plenty of instances where testers have said, well, nothing that we report as less than severity 2 is ever going to get fixed, so we just report everything as severity 1 and 2. It's kind of like, well, okay, that's sort of not the world's greatest workaround. I mean, because you now have 2 levels of severity that you're classifying and nothing else. So, is that really what you wanted, or is there a problem? And in those sort of situations, the programmers will typically say, we don't pay any attention to the severity or priority ratings of the testers' assignments. So we know it's all inflated, right? So basically, you've got this sort of boy who cried wolf problem, right? Of people are making a big deal out of things, or perceived as making a big deal out of things, and that damages the credibility of the test team. And I've seen extreme instances where you just had a few cases where bug reports were inflated, or there were problems, other kinds of problems with bug reports, and this was seized upon as evidence by developers and development managers, project managers, and so forth, that, those testers, they don't know what they're doing, nothing's, these bugs aren't important. Once had a couple instances of inflated severity ratings used as evidence to prove that none of the 1,000 bugs in the bug backlog actually mattered, which was certainly remarkable. So, you want to be very careful about not falling into this trap, because once you have fallen into it, it will be very difficult to get out of it. Your credibility will be damaged, and damaged in a way that will be difficult to recover from. It'll take some time, and those kinds of problems that cause this are not necessarily simple problems to fix. So you will have to put a certain amount of work in to get this issue resolved. All right, the next deadly sin here is somewhat related to something I mentioned earlier of ignorance, but it's a little different in the sense that this is really just not either willfully or inadvertently having no awareness of what's important for the organization and what constitutes organizational success. Basically being completely out of alignment with organizational goals and priorities. And this can lead to things like deflating defect importance, or even not reporting certain defects, or not testing certain things, saying, that's not really important, that doesn't matter, we're not going to worry about that. Now, this can happen for a few reasons, and the two most frequent ones are a isolated test team. Distributed situations, for example, it's really easy for this to happen. So in that case, what you want to do is really work to make sure that you've identified all the stakeholders and built strong relationships with them, because otherwise you'll have again, this sort of lack of awareness of priorities, and this just kind of results in you doing the wrong things. Now, the other reason that this can happen is siloing, where groups are kind of off doing their own thing, and in some cases it's silo by demand, right? I mean, or by design. Agile is that way. It has that problem of agile teams are sort of siloed by design. It's supposed to be self-directing, bottom up. There's strong potential for siloing in those kind of situations. Apologies for the security system going off in the background there. So again, if there's siloing happening, you want to make sure that you're opening better communication channels across the organization to avoid it. Now, blindness to priorities can lead to testing groups making some very serious mistakes, and recovering from those mistakes can be very difficult, because it has the same sort of symptoms as some of the other sins. But if you have managed to avoid making any serious mistakes, you know that you're not doing a good job of being aware of the overall priorities, but we haven't screwed anything up because of it yet, then just address the problem, and you should be able to recover. Now, here's a case study of blindness, priority blindness. One of our clients was a small startup organization, and this is in the 2000s, and what happened was that they were going through a lot of money, and the .com bust started to happen, and the venture capitalists got nervous and said, well, look, we're not going to give you any more money until you field a product, and your burn rate right now is too fast, and you're not going to get a product out, your current burn rate, without more money, so you're going to have to do some layoffs. You're going to have to let people go. And they went through this exercise of trying to identify, which teams were delivering the most value. Pardon me. And the developers, ultimately, all the developers were kept, and half of the testers were let go. And when I talked to the test manager about this, the root cause of that was that he was unable to connect the value of what he was doing to the organizational priorities. So he couldn't communicate about testing value in terms that actually connected with the priorities of the organization. So, this is if you don't understand what the organization is trying to do, what the priorities are, what its goals are, what success means to that organization, you're going to have a great deal of difficulty succeeding as a test team, because you're off. This is going to get you off into that land of irrelevance again. All right, and then we have another one here, which is what I'm making up a new word, last-moment-ism. This is the situation where not through external constraints, but simply because of the way that the test team chooses to organize their testing, they find really important bugs right at the end of the test execution period. And this leads to a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth amongst the developers and business stakeholders, project managers, and so forth, because it creates a lot of schedule risk and often results in actually missing delivery dates, and you hear people yelling things like, "Why am I hearing about this for the first time right now?" Now, why would this be happening, and what should you do about it? Well, if you are not doing risk-based testing, then you're almost guaranteed to be running your tests in the wrong order. So you want to adopt risk-based testing, which I think is a great idea anyway, and use an understanding of risk to sequence your tests. Now, I don't have time to go into a lot of details about risk-based testing and how it works and so forth here, as I mentioned before, but I would direct you to the digital library and the RBCS website, as well as the other areas in the RBCS website where there are a lot of articles and videos and other resources to help you institute proper risk-based testing. And I will say that proper risk-based testing is a lot more than what has been described by some people, of just going through the requirements and looking at their priorities, or relying on your own instincts to figure out what's at risk. It's a collaborative process of working with the various business and technical stakeholders. Now, maybe you say, okay, well, we're doing risk-based testing, Rex, and we are doing it the way that you've described it in your books and articles and so forth, but we're still having this problem. Well, if that's happening, then it's quite likely that your risk-based testing process is broken. You don't have all of the necessary stakeholders in the room. You are inflating the ratings of things, and so you're running them earlier than they needed to be, which necessarily leads to running something later than it should be. Another thing that can happen that can cause this is a failure to include reactive testing techniques like exploratory testing and so forth into testing until the very end. Because one of the things that you need to do with risk-based testing is remember that your risk analysis is going to be imperfect. It's going to have gaps in it and so forth. There's going to be things that you would miss. If the only thing that happens to try to detect those gaps is a bunch of exploratory testing right at the end after all of the analytical tests are run, is that you're going to find those gaps, and then some of them are going to be important, and it's going to be, it's going to blow up in your face, and exploding cigar stuff. So make sure that you've got reactive testing integrated into the entire test execution process. Now, it's not so hard to put risk-based testing into place. But one of the things that I would point out is that it does take a while to get good at doing it. So, definitely want to work through, so plan on working through a couple projects before you get to the point where this isn't happening as much anymore. Oops, I'm sorry. So, it's final case study here. We had a situation where there was this constant stream of major problems being found very late in the project, and people were complaining. Business and technical stakeholders were complaining, you guys should have found those a long time ago. I don't understand why this is coming up now. There's no risk-based testing going on, whether in terms of when to run the tests or how much effort to put into it. Programmers and project managers just were very, very displeased with a lot of things, and particularly including this sort of last-moment surprises that kept coming up, and basically stretched out what was supposed to be a 6-week test period into a 12-week test period, Now, not all of that was the fault of the test team, but they ended up bearing the brunt of the consequences, and they were unable to communicate, why it wasn't their fault. And plus, they hadn't really taken any steps personally to avoid that from happening anyway. So it's kind of hard if you haven't done anything to try to solve a problem to point to other people and go, oh, it's their problem. So this particular testing service provider was not re-engaged for the next project based on that problem. All right, so some conclusions here. Again, as I said at the outset, don't assume that just because you've got a talented set of testers that your test team will necessarily be an enormous success. Simple mistakes in attitude and behavior, such as the 7 deadly sins that we've just looked through, can cause some really big problems. In some cases, problems that would actually torpedo the survival of the test team and lead to the dissolution of the team. So look for these problems, recognize if you're doing them, recognize the extent to which you're doing them, assess how much damage has been done, get them fixed if you're doing it, and then realize that the more damage has been done, the longer it's going to take for the damage to go away. Because what we're talking about here ultimately is behaviors and attitudes, so it's relationship damage, it's business relationship damage. And, like any sort of relationship, once it has been damaged, it does tend to take a while to fix it. You do want to definitely make sure that your resolution of the problems that you'd identified before are not only have you fixed the problems, but you've made sure that the people who are negatively affected by those problems are all aware of the fact that you have fixed the problems. So market the fact you've resolved the problems. Okay, well, we will, as usual, put the advertisement up and go into question and answer mode here. Okay, I've got the question and answer pane up, so if anybody wants to give me questions, I am ready to go on the Q&A. So get a question or two via email to get us started here. Are some sins worse than others? Is it possible to rank the sins, if you will? This question came up in the afternoon session too. It really isn't, and that's why I said at the beginning of this, like, these are in no particular order, because the amount of damage that's occurring is from any one of these particular sins is a function of a lot of things. One is it's a function of degree, how much of the behavior is going on, how much of the attitude exists. If you've got 1 or 2 people in your test team who occasionally nitpicks on something or gets overly obsessed in some unimportant detail, that's not likely to cause a huge amount of damage. But if everybody in your testing team is constantly obsessed over over minor issues and so forth, that could have had some very serious effects. Same thing with, if you've got one tester who sometimes has kind of a temper and comes across as kind of an obstructionist pain in the butt, or sometimes is not very flexible. And again, that's probably not huge damage. But if everybody is saying, no, don't do that, that's wrong, and so forth, everybody's obstructionist is going to be more damage. So I wouldn't think that you could come up with any sort of list that said, okay, this is the sorted order of these sins. It's more along the lines of you need to be sensitive to the damage that has been done, that is being done, and address it that way. Okay, so Ramesh has a question here with regard to last-moment-ism. He says, problem would have been introduced due to other teams, like side effect of some bad code or build-related issue. How to avoid problems from other teams? Well, you really can't, Ramesh. That's a good point. Again, somebody brought that up in the afternoon session. if the reason that you're finding bugs late in the project is because people aren't getting you code on time, or you're not getting stuff that works, and your tests are blocked until the last minute, then what you really need to do is explain to people, look, this is what we are doing to try to avoid the last-minute discovery of serious problems. But these are the reasons why we're still finding problems at the last minute, right? Because you're the messenger, right? You're the one who's coming forward with the problems at the last minute. So the onus is going to be on you to be able to explain why that is not your fault. Why you're taking every possible step using risk-based testing to avoid that, and yet it's still happening because people aren't giving you the code that you need and the proper level of stability, in a timely fashion. Yeah. So make sure that if you have externally induced problems, that you're able to identify that those are externally induced, and that those external factors are the things that are defeating what you're doing already to try to avoid that from occurring. Another email question here. Why do people sometimes persist in these behaviors? Well, why do people persist in any sort of dysfunctional behavior? There can be various reasons. One is that they think they should, right? They think they're supposed to. Unfortunately, I think there has been a message peddled to QA people, and I don't hear a lot of it lately, but I think there was a lot of it around in the formative years of testing, and there still is some of it certainly floating around that you run into. I mean, I hear it from clients. I don't hear so much from other experts, but the sort of idea that, well, testing's there to be a cop, it's there to be a gatekeeper, it's there to the quality control, right? I mean, this kind of some of these phrases, and you hear people talking about wanting to be able to stop a release. And I had one tester tell me, oh, the most successful testing effort I ever led was when we managed to get a release canceled. And I thought, well, that's just really kind of odd. It's like I've been on projects where things went badly from a quality point of view, and that led to rethinking of the project and ultimately cancellation. But I certainly wouldn't think of that as successful in the sense that we help the company avoid injuring themselves, but it'd certainly rather be successful with success, right? So I think there is some amount of these behaviors just being, people think they're supposed to do it. They think they're supposed to be disliked creatures in projects because that's just inherent in the nature of testing. And that's really not true. I've seen enough counterexamples of test teams that were very much admired and seen as essential service providers within organizations to know that there is no need to be seen as a negative force. So yeah, I think that's one reason why people do it. They think they should. I think there's other things that just sometimes people can't help themselves. If somebody's personality is fundamentally negative and contrary and so forth, it's just going to be very difficult for them to play a positive role. And you have to ask yourself as a test manager, if you are a test manager, whether you want to be associated with that. And if you're the kind of person that you have that weakness and you fall into that trap behavior-wise, you're going to have to take some steps to deal with that, because that's going to lead to a lot of long-term relationship issues that are going to come up and create problems for you. So I got a question here from Nandita. Thank you for a very concise and clear session. You are quite welcome. My pleasure. So the question goes on to say, after most of these issues are fixed in the test team and the team is at a high-performing mode, What are your suggestions on adding, integrating a senior member into the team? How do we ensure the momentum is maintained and there's no change of course? All right, and that is an excellent question. You know, what you have to do is your interview process, you really need to use a lot of behavioral interviewing techniques and other types of, you know, processes such as reference checks and so forth where you can do them to try to get a sense of, you know, what is it going to be like to work with this person? Because again, you know, the things I've been talking about here, these deadly sins, I mean, they all pretty much they arise from attitudes and behaviors and so forth, and you know, if you just interview for skills-based competence, you're going to miss some of the warning signs of, we're about to hire somebody who's a grade A obstructionist, or we're about to hire somebody who is just a completely you know, intolerable nitpicker, you know, and you know, you have to be very careful about that. I mean, I think this is a very perceptive question that you asked, because if you bring in a high-level person who's you know, at a lead level or a test manager level, and they've got some of these behaviors and attitudes going, the damage is quick, right? I mean, so it's like the old thing about, you know, reputation is a lifetime to earn and a moment to destroy, you know, and that's what all of these things are as well. It's you know, invest a lot of time and energy getting your reputation where you want it to be, and then you find that you know, some unfortunate incident has really done some significant damage to it. Okay, well that's great. We've got had a couple questions and a couple email questions, so you know, good session. Close the session. Let me tell you a little bit more about the resources available through RBCS. These free webinars run once a month, so you can check our website, rbcs-us.com, to sign up. If you would like a special webinar presentation for your company only of this webinar or on any other topic related to software testing, please contact us at info@rbcs-us.com or via our website. If you don't receive our regular free newsletter, sign up at rbcs-us.com. Pardon the dog. This will get you valuable discounts on consulting and training services, and a regular newsletter that includes a featured article on software testing and quality, and news about what RBCS and its partners are doing lately. We are on Twitter at RBCS, and we are also on Facebook at RBCS-INC. Do remember to check your email over the next few days. You might be the lucky winner of a free e-learning course from RBCS. You were registered to win just by attending this free event. Check out my blog, rbcs-us.com/blog. Post comments or email me with topics you'd like to discuss. And check out our digital library. We have recordings of these webinars, podcasts, and videos of various sorts. Podcasts can be downloaded from iTunes by entering RBCS Podcast into the search string and then subscribing. Or you can see the videos and recorded podcasts by subscribing to the RBCS channel on YouTube. We offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. This concludes the webinar. I thank all of you for attending today, and I look forward to seeing you at future events.